Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Heth and I teach history on the South Campus. I want to talk to you today about using literacy groups to interpret primary source documents in your classroom. Literacy groups are a useful strategy in that they provide a collaborative structure to get students working together to decipher or to interpret, in this case, primary source documents. Assigning individual roles for each student encourage them each to participate in a different way. And then finally, it raises the level of engagement with texts through this structure. So some things to consider here as you design literacy group activities is that these are meant to be low stakes or ungraded activities, that this is the opportunity for students to work together to build their skills or to build understanding of a particular topic. So pay attention to what your learning outcomes are and design the activity and group roles with this in mind. And also pay attention to each classroom's dynamics, that sort of personality of the class. Are they quiet? Are they chatty? Do they get off task easily? Some groups or some classes are unwilling to dig deeper. Sometimes groups of students will lack skepticism, that they'll accept whatever interpretation is first presented to them. And in some cases, students are likely to skip over words or concepts that are difficult to process. So designing group roles that can work with those situations is going to be important. In the history classroom, particularly, I noticed that some students are unwilling or unable to read beneath the surface of the text. So literacy groups set up a path that requires students to engage more deeply with what they're reading. And given the fact that a lot of students struggle with 18th and 19th century language that is unfamiliar to them, this gives them an opportunity to really slow down and take it step by step. Also, I teach a lot of the INRW co-requisite courses, which means that many of the students have not had a lot of success in reading or writing. And so this gives us the opportunity to break down these primary sources that are the basis for our history. So the example that I'm going to show you today is just one of a variety of examples of literacy groups in action. I call this sort of text chunking with comprehension and analysis questions. So just like the name suggests, I'm dividing these primary sources into smaller segments where the students have to stop and reconsider what they've just read. Do they understand the words on the page, or do they have an opportunity to dig deeper into what the primary source is trying to tell them? So these questions are sort of like signposts along the way that you need to stop and consider what you've just read. And then in addition, I have the opportunity to draw students' attention to unfamiliar words or alternative word use. So sometimes I'll bold or underline a word, and I want the students to look up that word specifically because it's important to the meaning of the sentence or of the segment. So dividing students into groups is important because you don't want a group to be too small, because sometimes small groups will get stuck because they don't have enough voices to sort of work out the problem. And on the flip side, sometimes groups can be too large because, or the result is that you have students who are disengaged from the activities. So trying to find a happy medium for your classroom is going to be important with literacy groups. And then of course, assign each student a role. One of the things that I've discovered when I've used this before is I really want groups of 4, but sometimes because of the class numbers, I'll end up with a few groups of 5. And I didn't initially have a role for that 5th student. And that student didn't feel like he was a part of what was going on in his group. So I've made an accommodation for how to deal with that in the future. So for this activity that I've used in my class, I have 4 group roles. And to go back to what I was just talking about on the last slide, if I have a 5th student, then that group has an additional elaborator that they're able to assist in seeking connections to building on the current topic by elaborating or expanding on what's already been discussed. And so they're always helping to move the conversation forward. But for this activity, I have a facilitator, a recorder, a dictionary investigator, and an elaborator. Just a note on the dictionary investigator. This was something I developed as part of my INRW co-requisite courses because I didn't want students to be afraid to use the dictionary to look up words. So this is that person's role. And there are certain words that the group must look up. So the document that we're looking at in this activity is the South Carolina Ordinance of Secession from 1860. And so you can see there are 2 words that are bolded and underlined that the groups must look up. But this is the first chunk of this primary source. And the students read this together and then they address the question. And what I've discovered is that something that seems obvious to me when I'm reading this document is not necessarily obvious to the students. But by working together and working through this language, they're able to come up with the answer to this first question. So if you're interested in using literacy groups in your class, here's some things to keep in mind is, first of all, clearly explain the purpose of the activity. For the activity that I just showed, I really want students to look at how South Carolina is outlining their argument for secession. They take a very methodical approach through the text, but if I just have the students read the text on their own, they don't always catch that. So by chunking the text and having signposts along the way, I'm sort of leading students down that path a little more clearly. Second, using clearly defined roles so everyone knows what is expected of them in the group assignment. Third, always provide ongoing supervision and support. It's really easy for students to get off task. It's easy for students to get frustrated when they can't figure it out. So constantly circulating and pointing students in the right direction is helpful. And then finally, offer an opportunity for a large group sharing and synthesis. So close the loop. So once the students have worked through all of the chunks of text and answered all of the questions, then I'll throw out a couple of questions such as, how does the South Carolina Ordinance of Secession relate to the Texas Ordinance of Secession that they do a journal assignment on as individuals? So we're bringing that back into the lesson that we've been going through. So in the history classroom, it's really easy to use literacy groups because we have all sorts of written documents, both primary and secondary sources, that we can have students read through together and parse out the meaning. But students often have difficulty understanding what they read, whether it's their physics textbook or in their sociology class. They read the words, but they have difficulty really understanding what they're supposed to get out of it. So by using literacy groups, you're helping students understand how to use the skill of gaining knowledge from text. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day.